This is you. I forgot the name of the podcast already. You can't say anything anymore. I can't say anything anymore.
I was told that the only way to fix the injury was to have a surgery where screws are placed in my spine.
What is enlightenment?
Again, not a short answer.
Yeah.
I struggled as a person of colour trying to get into spaces that would only represent white people.
To what extent, and we've talked about it a little bit, to what extent is the Western practice of yoga appropriation?
I really liked what you were saying earlier about how yoga is about turning inwards, whereas it seems that a lot of like what we see on social media as yoga is made for the outwards.
Please stop all this woke agenda.
It's political correctness gone mad.
Sorry, Thought Police.
You're such a snowflake.
Surely all lives matter.
Did those sound familiar? Here on You Can't Say Anything Anymore, we unpack the nuances of these comments and bring sidelined lived experiences to the forefront. Brought to you by Diversifying Group.
Hello and welcome to this month's podcast, You Can't Say Anything Anymore. I'm one of your hosts today. I'm Yanni. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a diversity and inclusion consultant at Diversifying Group. And today I'm joined with a fellow colleague and host, Fos. So give us a little introduction to you and also the little introduction to the topic we're going to be talking today.
Absolutely. Hi, I'm Fos. My pronouns are she, they. I'm the head of recruitment marketing and employer brand at Diversifying Group. And the topic that we're going to be talking about today is decolonizing yoga. We have a fantastic guest, and I'm a huge fan of yoga. I've been doing it for quite a few years, so really excited to have a conversation about kind of, I guess, bringing yoga back to its roots. And our guest is the amazing Nikita. Nikita, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi, I'm Nikita. I'm a yoga instructor and educator living in London. I teach yoga, but I also teach people on how to use the practice of yoga respectfully and authentically. I've been doing that for the last 2 or 3 years now. And actually the name of the podcast is perfect for what we're going to speak about, because a lot of people do say you can't say anything nowadays. And it's the whole point of what we're trying to do, and like the whole movement of spirituality or consciousness, being more conscious is, you can't really say much without thinking about it first anymore. So yeah.
Amazing. So glad to have you here. I guess maybe let's kick things off with a very broad question. What is yoga to you?
So that's a very, like you said, it's a very broad question. There are a lot of answers that I could give you. And I won't say that, I won't give you a short answer that you're just going to be able to like go away and think about, because I just don't think that we could narrow it down to just one answer. But it is, I'll give you the purpose of yoga, because I feel like that's more important with the context of what we're speaking about now. So the purpose of the practice is for people to be able to reach enlightenment, and that's what all the practices of yoga are used for, or were used for traditionally. And for me personally, it is exactly that. So a lot of the times we have things in life that we might find difficult, or things might come up for us, like our mental health. It's a means for managing that. It's a means for healing. It has so many purposes, but for me personally, it's probably a means for healing and a way of life. So the way of incorporating the ancient tradition into daily life and our daily routines and the way that we live.
So I try to go for like, tell our listeners and viewers, if you're watching on YouTube, if like a complete like intro into yoga, if you're coming from nothing, like what is enlightenment?
So again, not a short answer.
Yeah.
And it's not a short answer because there's not just one linear definition in yogic text that you might read. So I feel like it is a bit of what you might feel personally, but also what it is kind of reaching a place where you're kind of detached from everything in terms of the material world, and the stuff that people tend to worry about in today's world, which is extremely hard because obviously it's hard for us to come onto a path when we're brought up in a world where we're used to, or we're what's the word, where we're accustomed to having these ties with the stuff in this material world, and with kind of getting caught up in that, if that makes sense. So reaching enlightenment means detaching yourself from those kind of worldly materials and those thoughts and feelings as much as you can. And it's a path, it's a journey, and it's a process, and it's not something that anyone, I don't know anyone who has fully reached that place, and reached that place in this lifetime. So it's exactly what yoga teaches as well. But I mean, I always say that you probably can't learn, well, not probably, you can't learn everything about yoga in one lifetime. It will probably take many lifetimes to learn what this practice is. And every time you delve into it, first of all, there's always something different that you might learn. But secondly, also, it's like a rabbit hole in any topic that you go into. So things can't just be explained in one sentence or one way.
Yeah, so just a really complex thing. I love what you said about you need multiple lifetimes to be able to enlightenment. That's a really beautiful way to look at it. I liked how you were talking about healing before as well, and kind of like that journey towards enlightenment, or that journey towards healing. Would you be able to tell us a bit more maybe about your personal journey and kind of the journey that you've taken to becoming a yoga educator, and I guess the journey that you are still on as well?
Sure, yeah. So I came onto the path of practicing yoga as we know it in the West after I participated in a skydive about 9 years ago now, and I ended up injuring my lumbar spine. So I was told that the only way to fix the injury was to have a surgery where screws are placed in my spine and a disc is removed, but my mobility wouldn't be as good as it would be before surgery, and I decided not to go down that route. So I started to seek out alternative methods of healing, and a couple of friends had recommended yoga, and yoga is a practice that we are brought up with, being brought up as a Hindu and an Indian, but it's not something that you're kind of told that you're doing yoga like when we're growing up with it, because it's not the sense that people know today. So there are some Indian households that bring their children up with yoga, asana, other physical postures, but my household wasn't one of those. So we practiced the other elements of yoga. So we practiced stuff like mantras, mudras, chanting. So there would be a very big difference to the yoga that you see today. So when to knowing about yoga in the West or in modern day, it was also completely new to me. It's not something that I'd ever experienced. I'd never been to a yoga class. So yeah, I went to I didn't actually go to a class probably for a good few months. I started practicing on YouTube, and I found that it started to help subside some of those symptoms that the injury was causing me. And it was also helping my mental health. So I've always suffered from severe depression and anxiety from a very young age, probably the age of 8. And I've struggled to kind of find ways of coping with that. So when this practice started to help some of those symptoms as well, it made me wonder how. But on the YouTube videos that I was practicing with, hardly any of the teachers ever kind of explained those parts, like they'll be touched upon, but not,
Yeah.
no one would ever go into detail. So yeah, that's how I began practicing. And then I continued practicing. I'd done a teacher training in Thailand after maybe a year of practicing.
Right.
I wanted to be able to help people the way that yoga had helped me. And when I came back from Thailand, I kind of had that itch to start teaching straight away, not knowing that I probably, like, I wasn't aware of all of the kind of ways that you're really prohibited from teaching it as a new teacher in the yoga industry, because one, you don't have experience. Having that 200-hour training is not going to be enough for you to go ahead and like just start teaching in like the biggest gyms or biggest studios. And two, I just didn't have enough experience from that training either. So although you are training 200 hours, like I said, the practice of yoga, like you won't even know everything about it probably in this one lifetime. So
Yeah.
the way that these teacher trainings churn out like thousands and thousands of teachers each year,
Oh.
kind of a little bit of another issue, because we've got people just going out there and who may not necessarily be super confident in teach the practice, or a lot of those trainings don't teach it in its most authentic form. So it's not to say that's all of them. There probably are do, but yeah, I was one of those people that just thought, yeah, I can go and teach, and I struggled.
Yeah.
For a while, and I didn't only struggle because of that reason, but I struggled as a person of color, trying to get into spaces that would only represent white people predominantly,
Yeah.
like the token brown person or black person. So that went on for quite a while, and after about another year or so, I started to look into ways that I could maybe open up my own space. So in the height of the pandemic, I opened a studio, and the intention was to have a place where I could eventually get people of color to come and teach at this space, like give them platform to stand
Love
up in,
that.
share their work, and also a space for people who feel excluded from usual yoga or wellness spaces to come and practice as well. But because of the time that I opened it in, it didn't do so well. So we were open for a year and a half, but during that time there were a lot of lockdowns and
it was tough.
Limitations. So it ended up closing early last year, which is when I started speaking about, or started being more vocal about the way that things are in the yoga and wellness industry when it comes to the BIPOC community, and when it comes to the exclusion of people of color as well.
Yeah.
Not just people of color, just anyone who's from a marginalized background. I started speaking about it before I closed the studio, but I wasn't always comfortable with being so. These things have always kind of been in the background of my practice, but again, as a person of color, you just don't feel like you have the right to speak up, because you're going into a space, you're entering spaces where even still today, when I speak in spaces or festivals where I go to, there are a huge group of white people, and you just don't know how it's going to be received, because a lot of people have their backup, and they're like, so you're saying I can't practice yoga, but that's not the message work that I do.
Yeah, people get very defensive, like as like a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was wondering, you mentioned that you didn't feel comfortable speaking up at first, and even to this day you still sometimes don't feel entirely comfortable, but what kind of gave you that push to really start talking about it and really kind of make your voice be heard about this topic?
Yeah, well, I guess it was loads of small things that kind of built up to a point where I was just like, I've had enough of like the same kind of things happening in this industry. Brands asking you to like work with them or collaborate with them, and then they don't want to give you like a fair pay compared to who you might know is another white teacher in that space and who is getting like more than what you would get. But also just the representation or the lack of so just not people not or brands not representing people of color after they're profiting off of yoga, and just even after seeing practices like puppy yoga or goat yoga or
beer yoga. That's the one I was always like, I don't understand. Even when you market it, I still don't understand.
Yeah, and it's funny because a lot of people of color have the same reaction. They're like, why would you want to do that? And it's just mostly white people that don't understand why. And that's not, I do totally understand that there are people that really aren't aware of why that might be harmful to the people who come from the culture or for the culture itself. Because even right at the beginning of my journey, I may not have thought that puppy yoga was kind of disrespectful, just because I would have thought what everyone else thinks, oh, it's cute. But that's why it's really important to not just look at yoga as a surface level practice and really start to kind of research and educate yourself on what this practice actually is. Because it was after I started practicing and teaching and realizing and reading that the practice makes you turn inwards every time, and that's the whole point of it, to be able to heal. And so when you're doing the practices of yoga and you're sitting yourself down, putting yourself in a position where you're going to start your practice, you're not going to really need a puppy distracting you or a goat distracting you. You don't really want to be intoxicated because it's going to take away from that focus, or it's going to take away from the purpose as well of you trying to do that inner work and that inner healing. But a lot of people still don't understand it, even if you do explain it, because they're always like, but why? It's telling you from the culture that it's disrespectful, that's why. And I feel like a lot of people have a hard time understanding that.
So we've got like a lot to unpack there. There's just so much to unpack. And even you said that after years of like lifetimes of yoga, we're probably not gonna fully understand like get the enlightenment. But also I don't think even like in this 1 hour of recording, I don't think we're gonna get the full extent of like the damage that like this life is like creating yoga. So let's just have like the big question of like, to what extent, and we've talked about a little bit, to what extent is the Western practice of yoga appropriation? The big question.
To quite a big extent. And it's not, like I said, it's not because of people it's not because of people wanting to be ignorant to it a lot of the time. You could be, I mean, it happens even with people of color sometimes as well, and they're just not aware. Like I said, there were certain things I weren't aware of when I began my journey as well. But the important thing is that you keep researching and looking into stuff. But yeah, in the West, it's just carried away. People have got carried away with just asana and just focusing on those physical postures and using that as a way to show people that only that's yoga. And most of the time, no one else knows that there are all of these other things that are yoga, but people wouldn't yoga because they just wouldn't think that it's linked to yoga in any way, because we've got this perception in our head that yoga is just a physical practice that helps you to become more flexible, or it's just stretch. And that's the danger with calling everything yoga nowadays as well. We can't just like keep calling stuff yoga when it really isn't. You really kind of narrow down the meaning of the practice and the term, and again, whilst causing harm to people from the culture.
Yeah.
I guess there's have you noticed there's maybe like a big thing with, I guess, the world that we live in now, that's very more focused on the material and things like that, that has kind of taken that yoga physicality as the only thing. And I really liked what you were saying earlier about how yoga is about turning inwards, whereas it seems that a lot of like what we see on social media as yoga is made for the outwards instead. I guess, do you think that maybe we've lost sight of the spirituality and the roots of yoga, and is there a way for people to kind of like get back to that, maybe like just on a personal level? Because when, like I said, I've been doing yoga for years, but at first I really struggled with the more internal and spiritual side of things. I would hate being in shavasana at the end of the practice. If any listeners don't know yoga, shavasana is the pose at the end of the practice where you just lie down. And I used to hate it because my mind would just come flooding with thoughts, and I just couldn't relax and turn inwards. So I guess, do you have any tips for people who might need a way to get back to that internal focus and that spirituality?
Well, there's a few things with that actually, and one of the things is that because yoga is a healing practice, it's not necessarily for everyone, and that's where have got lost in the Western world as well, where it's been reduced to a physical practice, and people still teach it with the basics of what it would be taught as traditionally. So they would have some of the pranayama, some of the breath work, some of the bits like shavasana incorporated in the classes, but not necessarily knowing the meaning of what, or the purpose of these practices and what they actually do. So when you start looking into them, actually shavasana isn't comfortable for everyone, and it's not something that people want to sit, and neither can meditation be sometimes. Like sometimes you don't want to sit with your thoughts and you don't want things to come up. So maybe just knowing exactly what you're getting into when you are practicing yoga, and again just kind of researching into these practices, because they're not just surface level practices. It's not just laying down at the end and that's it. There are meanings to each practice as well. But also people find that their mind just likes to wonder when they do sit still, and that's the problem again with kind of Western yoga, because people are too carried away with getting into it as a physical practice and kind of doing like forms of power yoga or doing yoga for abs or like weight loss or whatever it is, and do that, and then they're putting you in a shavasana. Your mind's not going to want to sit still. Whereas traditional yoga will take you into a place where, or it will be a practice where you'll be maybe going at a slower pace, and be incorporating more of the practices in, like mudras, bandhas, mudras, which are gestures or seals, bandhas, which are locks that we can use internally in our bodies, and pranayama, which is breathwork practices. So incorporating all the elements kind of helps you get to that stage of where you're able to maybe sit in a steady position or a steady seat. As Patanjali actually says in his sutras as well, he says Sthira Sukhamasanam, which loosely translates to being able to sit in a steady seat for an extended period of time. And that's probably the way to describe yoga or to describe the purpose of asana, really. And it's to reach a higher state of consciousness. So doing things in the way that things are done in the West aren't necessarily always for the purpose of reaching that higher state enlightenment, and that's the problem.
So it's really interesting you have mentioned like some of the yoga was like yoga for abs, yoga for weight loss. How have we got to this point? Like how is it like evolved in the like last couple of decades, I guess? Like how have we got here?
Well, the practice was actually brought over to the West by a Hindu monk whose name is Swami Vivekananda, and he had the intention of making people more spiritually aware and more aware of practices that Hinduism teaches, and spiritual aspects of the practice too. And the core of Hinduism is yoga, and you'll see a lot of yoga intertwined throughout Hinduism as well. And so when he brought it over, he didn't just deliver it as one part, which is asana. He delivered it like as a whole, but people chose what they wanted to take from that, which were the physical postures. So as time went on, people started to kind of make their own versions of the practice, and yeah, they just started to use it as a means of exercise or as a way to gain flexibility. Obviously just left the other bits behind.
Yeah. I'm curious about like your training as well. So when you did your training, what did they actually, because you've talked about lots of different parts about yoga and even on your social media, I love how you demystify yoga and your thing of one truth at a time. I absolutely love that, just like that, the headline there. But what did they actually teach you during your training? Did they teach you all the spiritual parts, or did they just focus on, tell us about that.
Yeah, they did actually, and they did teach us those parts. We did have philosophy lectures, and I feel like a lot of teacher trainings are set out in that way. We didn't learn the actual part of yoga that's important and what we're talking about as well, which is the exclusion of minority groups, or how it's become so westernized and what the problem is with that. And I feel like that's really important to learn on teacher trainings. Though you are learning philosophy and the other practices and the other elements of it, it is kind of focusing on, or heavily focused on, asana. And I did feel like my teacher training did focus a lot on asana as well. And there's like a competitiveness in, not just on, it wasn't just on my teacher trainings, but it carried through into like the yoga and wellness industry as we see it today as well. Like on social media, and who can be the most flexible, who can do the deepest back bend, and who can get into the splits or a handstand. And it can be very dangerous to see yoga in that way, because if you're a beginner to it and you do want to get into the practice, but you feel like you're not good enough because you can't do those postures, you might just start jumping into them without any prior practice and end up injuring yourself.
That's really interesting that you said that it talked to you about like the philosophy and also like exclusion of different groups.
No, they didn't.
Oh, they didn't. Okay, sorry. I thought they did, and I was like, that's really interesting, because I must say, like, I just don't think people actually, otherwise I just see when like the demographics of like what you usually see as a yoga instructor that comes to mind. It's just I feel like no one ever talks about that, but no, that makes perfect sense. And it's really important that it should be taught, because if you think about like a stereotype of a yoga instructor that comes to mind of all the things that I've seen is usually like a really skinny white woman.
Yeah,
and that's why it makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, and that's And it also makes white people feel uncomfortable when you put that fact out there as well.
So true.
And what people really need to look at, if that is offending you, is why you're so kind of taken aback by that statement, when it is a fact. And you can go and hit it yourself, like Google yoga, look for yoga on YouTube, look for yoga on TikTok, or don't, because TikTok is probably the worst for it. But just the hypersexualization of it, the way that it's just portrayed as a one-size-fits-all practice, the way that it's heavily focused on, like I said, back bend, splits, handstands, or any inversion, the way that a lot of the BIPOC community are excluded from the practice, and marginalized groups are excluded from the practice. And I hear about this every single day. And I hear about people feeling excluded because they're of a larger body and they feel like they don't have a space or a place in yoga and wellness. And it's disheartening to see, because the practice really is for everyone. When you speak about the exclusion that happens in yoga, you're met with the phrase yoga is for everyone, but it doesn't make sense, because yoga is for everyone, but then why are marginalized communities being left out of it? So is it a case of people just thinking that, or white people just not being aware of their privilege in the world, I guess, because they're kind of the dominant culture.
It's like, I have like this whole this whole rant. I will go like a snippet into it, but it's that exclusion, I mean, it's like just, it's harming people's mental health, and it's also of the emotions, and it's also just harming people to feel excluded, and people can't heal. But I'm just there's another coin to it of it's actually harming people like financially, and particularly in Bali. So I'm half Indonesian, and I have seen like the damages of yoga to Bali, and I've been there, I've been going since I was a kid, and it's just devastating. So with all the tourism, people they want to go to Bali because it is a beautiful place. It's an incredible island, and people want to go and practice yoga there and do their training there. But what you're finding is that you'll have all these rich Westerners, usually like white Australians, set up a retreat, and they will develop buildings. They will only hire white staff, and there's only white people doing your courses. And that impact that's having on Bali is that there's overpopulation, that the infrastructure literally cannot take that. You're also taking away all the labor costs and all the money away from local people. And it's been such damage that they're pricing people out of their different areas. So locals have to go somewhere else. And because it's not somewhere else, it's a bit more remote, all of like people don't want to go there, and they think it's a little bit dirty and unclean, so it's not fashionable. So they're still having to opt for more Western types of yoga, even though you can go with local and stimulate the local economy, and it's just taking all the money away, and it's so damaging, and it's just really upsetting. And when I do tell people try go for a local instructor, they just like, oh, I don't know where to go. Like, Google.
But and that's, I didn't know all of that about Bali. I've always wanted to go there, and not gonna lie, that places where I wanted to do a second teacher training, which I don't think I'll be doing one anymore. But
oh no, just go. Honestly, Bali is magical. I'm not saying no one go. It's incredible.
But I've heard about it being like kind of just heavily kind of commercialized over there as well. Some of the issues that you speak about, but I wasn't aware about people opening up like spaces or studios and excluding the people who come from there, which is it. And going back to what you said about people not knowing where to find teachers or local studios, and you can Google, but we're also at a disadvantage there because we're not the first to show up on Google.
Yeah.
So you would have to really be specific in your search and putting brown yoga teacher or Indian yoga teacher, then you'll probably get what you're looking for. But and that's the problem with yoga, I think, as well, is that we should be the first people that show up because it is a practice that comes from this culture, and it's not about, I mean, people equate what I'm saying to gatekeeping, but it's not really gatekeeping. It's just kind of, we're entitled to that, and we shouldn't feel ashamed of being entitled to that. And although it's not a practice that like is anyone's in specifically, but it is a practice that belongs to India, and it comes from there. And I don't see why we shouldn't be at the forefront of these platforms. Why people can't find us. And a lot of people ask for resources of native teachers and where to find them as well. But again, sometimes, yeah, it's nice that you're asking, but exactly what you said as well, like you can search for them yourself, but you might just have to be more specific about how you're searching. Maybe not just putting in like a native yoga teacher's name or Indian yoga teacher's name for me. It kind of goes full circle as well, because like I said before at the start, we're not always the first to be employed or seen in these spaces. So you might not find a local teacher who is Indian or a person of color.
Yeah, you just have to, basically everyone has to work harder to get to their search, because so I've been recently going down a rabbit hole of like diversity in AI, and the data sets that everyone's trained on is literally just like Western data. And if those marginalized communities don't exist in the data pool, you're not going to go first. So like if you're working against it anyway. But yeah, but something that you do is you disrupt all the algorithm, because like your platform and like your social media, your Instagram, your TikTok, you are really like, yeah, you're disrupting that narrative and demystifying, as you said. So yeah, I really love that.
And it's not something that we should, like, it's not something that it would have been in my dream to be working on, to be honest. It was initially my dream to kind of become a successful yoga teacher and be able to help people in the ways that I do. This has brought with it another way that I can help people because of people feeling excluded, so I can kind of make things a bit more inclusive and diverse and more accessible. But again, white privilege gives you that opportunity and that platform to stand up and teach yoga and not have to worry about the other parts of it, like what I talk about. So it is worth, if you do have that privilege, kind of speaking up where you can as well, and kind of asking where are teachers of color, or where is the where's the representation of BIPOC in your studio or at this festival or in this brand. And there are ways of kind of, like earlier today actually, I went to the gym and my PT, he was like, I don't really read your posts like in too much detail, but I know what you talk about. And so when I had a client who came to me who said they wanted to do puppy yoga, he said, why would you do that? Like, why would, and he explained to them from seeing my posts that how wrong that is. And it's kind of these little things that make people, even if you think that it's not doing anything by you mentioning it, it does trigger something in someone. It plants a seed, and then they might go and look at it and they'll become aware of it. And that's the whole point of this practice as well, is to make people more aware and more conscious.
Yeah, we've got yoga allies now. That's
That's cool. One quick thing that we were talking about earlier with kind of Yanni, when you were talking about Bali, for example, and locals being priced out of their own area and things like that. I was wondering, Nikita, if you feel like we've talked as well about people being excluded from yoga before because of their body size, for example, or their ethnicity or things like that. Is there maybe a question about class as well? And like, is there something that we can do? Because yoga, if you think about kind of like the image of it, it's rich white women, or at least, well-off white women. So is there something that we can do to make yoga more accessible to classes as well, to lower socioeconomic classes? Because yoga is expensive and classes are expensive. So some people might be priced out of it. I guess, yeah, is that something that we can work to change, and how?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are loads of ways, and I'm constantly working on trying to find ways as well, because I don't know everything. And there are certain topics that as a teacher I can only kind of discuss, talk about, or advocate for at a time. So it's really hard to kind of say that I'm going to be like the face of advocating LGBTQ, and then the face of advocating people with larger bodies, and the face of advocating people of color. And for me, I think focusing on one thing at a time is really important in kind of getting us back to at least kind of like a stable place where people are aware of how inaccessible this practice is. Yeah, that, and class and caste ties into traditional yoga as well, and it's worth kind of looking into all of that. And as you said, it is delivered to upper class white women, and if you are a teacher who's putting practices out there, maybe having, like, I have a YouTube which is obviously free classes for people, so that's one thing that helps. And then second thing is, if you have if you're a teacher who has a membership, maybe having a tiered membership to make it more accessible for people who might not be able to afford a membership that's £20 a month. So maybe making it like £11 for people. And there are a lot of teachers as well who, if you drop them a message, I think they have it on their website, that they give like a discount, or they just accept donations for their teaching. So that when you do get into like looking for more diverse teachers, usually you will find it becoming more accessible. So that's the other thing for kind of teachers from the BIPOC community, because there are a lot of us, and not just me, there are loads who have, like, my platforms aren't even set up, but my membership isn't even set up yet, but there are loads who have theirs and up and running, and they have accessible ways of being able to pay for it, or if you, then you're allowed to reach out to them and let them know that you might be struggling and they can help you in some way.
Yeah, that's so important, especially in the cost of living, where
Yeah.
everything's going up, and people shouldn't have to sacrifice something that is like giving them that healing.
Yeah, exactly.
I was wondering, just because we're talking about maybe people, of different, who have never done yoga before, who might feel excluded by it, or who might be a little bit scared of it. Yeah, what would you say to someone who feels like yoga is not for them, that yoga is excluding them, but who would like to try it? Like, how would you advise them to get into it?
Yeah. Well, there's, so essentially a beginner, and there are billions of people who already practice yoga around the world, but I feel like whatever that number is would probably double if we had this practice looking like it, or being, not just looking like, but being more accessible, because beginners would want to come into it, and they are turned away because of what they see, and then thinking, and a lot of, I have friends as well who have said like, oh, I could never do yoga, I'm not flexible enough. And then they really, it's kind of a dangerous narrative as well, because then they really plant that in their head, and they're really like, I can't even touch my toes, or like, I can't even bend down, and so I can't do yoga. But yoga isn't just the physical postures, not just asana. We can do breath work, which is yoga. We can practice mudras, like I said, which is yoga. practicing yoga by incorporating it into your daily life. Like something that everyone knows are the yamas and niyamas, which are the moral code, ethic codes of conduct.
Mm-hmm.
Might want to take in and practice whilst just living. So looking at alternative ways of practicing, rather than just focusing on asana, because that's not the only way to practice yoga. And if it is asana that you really do want to practice, but you're turned away from it as well, then looking at practices that are slower and maybe more subtle, because the more subtle and slower the practice is, in my opinion, the more effective it has been for you to heal physically and emotionally and mentally.
Yeah, I think another thing I think as well about I think it's really important for beginners, and this is something like was a barrier for me, I think, was like clothes and equipment. Because you go, so for example, you go to Westfield, like just it's down the road from me. So you go to Westfield and you just walk on and stuff like there's Lululemon, there's Sweaty Betty, and they're having all these really like expensive yoga clothes. I remember just walking past and was like, I can't do that. What if I turn up and people will judge me for my clothes?
Yeah.
And I think it's important that you just need to know that like it's fine, just turn up. It doesn't matter how you look. Yeah.
And it ties into that whole conversation of it being only accessible to white upper class women, and you feeling excluded from it in that sense as well. There is no yoga attire that you have to conform to, and you should be able to wear whatever you want as long as you're and those are just kind of, I feel like social media has kind of just made that a thing, and also the hypersexualization of yoga has kind of led to that as well, to being able to like practice in like the skimpiest outfit or the and it's not to say that I don't wear them, it just means that there's also maybe no need to like spend hundreds of pounds on an outfit, just to kind of, and I've been there, like I have done that, and I used to support those brands that I will no longer support now because of, I know, but again it's just awareness. So kind of just really looking into or making yourself aware of how those brands are lacking representation, of color, and what they actually stand for, because if they're using yoga in their name and they're not honoring the roots of the practice in any way or making it accessible and inclusive to people, then why should you support them? And that's something that I struggled with like early on in my yoga journey as well, because I just thought that would make me a good teacher if I like kind of fit that mold of having that expensive outfit with that brand name on it and being able to get into the splits or a handstand. And that really don't matter, because like I said, this practice is an internal practice. That's not really going to get you anywhere. Maybe that ties into maybe more gym culture and stuff, but not it doesn't really go with like the values of yoga.
I guess it's become so kind of entrenched in capitalist culture now that they're putting profit above authenticity on there, and that's basically what's causing a lot of the issues that yoga is having. Obviously you came to yoga through asanas because you didn't realize that some of the things that you'd grown up doing were already yoga. So when you kind of like started to look at your practice as every single part of yoga, and when you did your teacher training and everything, was there everything that you had to unlearn? Any kind of like misconceptions that you had about yoga, or any kind of worries or anything that you had to unlearn?
Quite quite a few I had to unlearn myself. So there was that misconception of just having to be super strong and flexible to be able to practice or to be good enough to teach even. But obviously that's not true. Like I did focus on that a lot before as well, and it doesn't really get you anywhere because you just end up looking for yoga in the wrong places and practicing it in the least authentic form. And so maybe just even in like terms of what we were just talking about, like when I started and having to be in a yoga outfit, like I thought that that's what you have to like wear to practice. And that's not actually the case. Like I prefer wearing gym clothes or leggings or like a bralette but just for the simple fact of sometimes I feel like baggy trousers might trip over while I'm like doing an asana, or like a baggy t-shirt might just get in the way of like my drishti, which is gaze, when I'm like facing downwards. So that's why I prefer them in a practice. But obviously again, there's no set attire for the practice, and I feel like those are the biggest misconceptions that leads people away from practicing yoga.
Yeah. The baggy trousers thing, it hit me hard there because like when I started doing some yoga, I'm a massive klutz. So I used to get tangled up and just fall or trip or something. So yeah, that hit me hard there.
It's actually happened before as well. It's like your big toe gets caught in the trousers.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, you might as well just not practice wearing baggy
Yeah.
trousers.
Thank you again so much for being here today, for telling us, your story and teaching us a little more as well.
Yeah.
Being a white person myself, I've definitely come to yoga from that angle, and it's really interesting to learn more about it. And I think the point that you made about continuously educating ourselves and learning and searching things out, and not just being content with the first yoga teacher that we see on Google, and actually digging a little bit deeper, and I guess digging towards the roots. It's a very, very like physical image, isn't it? But getting to those roots of yoga is really important. So thank you so much for having that conversation with us today. I guess before we finish, would you be able to maybe recommend some resources for people who are interested to go in and have a look, or any other yoga instructors that people can follow to diversify their feed and start that process of research?
Yeah, so I have a TikTok page, Nikki Yoga, so NIKYYOGA, and the same name for my Instagram and YouTube. YouTube is where you can find my practices, which are quite beginner friendly. So there are loads of different ones, and you can find them all on there. But the resources that I have are mostly on TikTok. So I have a resources playlist on there where you can find loads of other native yoga teachers and teachers who are inclusive, and also on my Instagram, where I've done a few posts recommending books and teachers as well.
Amazing, thank you. And
Nice.
we'll link your Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube in the description of the podcast so people can go in and check you out. Definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much again. This has been You Can't Say Anything Anymore with Nikita, who is a fantastic yoga instructor. And yeah, hope the listeners enjoyed this. And yeah, see you next month for the next podcast.
See you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support this podcast, please share it with others and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Keep up to date with what we do at Diversifying Group at diversifying.com, or follow us on social media at Diversifying Group. See you next time.